bringing attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele. Thanks again for tuning in. Tonight, the guest is Tom Spellman. He sits on the board of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and in the interview I'm going to play later, we talk about a number of things, including the situation we find ourselves in now as a country and as a movement here over a decade after the 9/11 event took place. And we also go into his past and an interesting discussion about his process of becoming a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. I wasn't very knowledgeable about that topic and what the process was to do that. So you'll hear some things about that in the interview. And it's very interesting. I find it interesting. I think you will too. So stay tuned. I'll be playing that for you very soon. But I just want to go over some news tonight, 9/11 related, of course. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play this clip from C-SPAN's Washington Journal. This was on April 3rd. It was the same day that Jim McDermott gave his great response to a Building 7 question. So this other one to Congressman Tim Murphy was a bit overshadowed by it, but it's still important for you, the audience, to hear it. Tim Murphy, as is mentioned by myself, I'm the caller, and by Greta Bronner, the host, was a psychologist before coming to Congress. And listen to his response to my question about 9/11, controlled demolition evidence, Building 7, and cognitive dissonance, drawing from Fran Scher's research and great essays.
For some help there.
By the way, also Congressman Tim Murphy mentioned this, but has been a psychologist for 30 years, lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve Medical Service Corps, works with wounded warriors and traumatic brain injury and PTSD. Let's go to Robert in Vernon, New York. Independent caller. Hi, Robert.
Hi, thank you. And I want to thank you, Congressman, for the work you do, and also you, Greta, for presiding over this very important forum here on C-SPAN. Congressman, as Greta just mentioned, you were a psychologist before coming to Congress, so you're familiar with the term cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. And the biggest example of cognitive dissonance now is the fact that despite overwhelming scientific evidence proving that the third tower, Building 7, had to have been brought down with explosives on 9/11, members of Congress usually invent excuses to dismiss it because it challenges what they themselves want to believe. So for the sake of Americans, would you be willing to meet with representatives of over 2,000 building experts who are demanding a new investigation into Building 7's destruction and review the evidence that explosives brought it down?
Well, that's not a mental health issue, but thank you for your call.
We'll go to Cliff. San Antonio.
So Tim Murphy doesn't respond, and you're listening to it over the air right now, but you really need to see the video when it comes out because he clams right up. His body language says it all. He doesn't want to discuss this. So hitting a little bit too close to home for Tim Murphy there. In other news, we have a new video out by Jonathan Cole. He's been a guest on this show a couple of times in the past. Great researcher there. His new video is called 9/11, The Devil in the Details. And it's a pretty short video. It's only about 10 to 15 minutes long. But I highly recommend everyone go and see this. You can go to 9/11 Blogger to check it out. And there's a lot of meaning in that title, The Devil's in the Details, because in it he discusses Galileo and how it was heresy for Galileo to question what he did about whether or not the earth revolves around the sun or the sun revolves around the earth. Of course, the popular opinion at that time was that the sun revolved around the earth. Everything revolved around mankind because they were citing scripture, citing biblical passages that they interpreted as meaning that we were just the center of the universe. Now, when I looked at these same biblical passages, I didn't see that kind of meaning illustrated in it, and I guess I'm a little biased by living in our modern times when that issue has been settled and knowing what the true facts are and not having to fight the fights that Galileo fought on that topic. But at the time, folks who made these kinds of questions, who asked these kinds of questions, and asserted that the Earth was revolving around the sun, had to deal with a lot of the same kind of pushback that we here in our modern day regarding the issue of what really brought down the Twin Towers in Building 7 on 9/11 that we have to deal with too. Because it is the modern day heresy to question the state, to question the official version of that tragic day. Of course, all of the emotions tied in with 9/11 have played into that. And so folks don't want to go there. And they've been programmed to not want to go there by the media, by their government. And the good thing is people are starting to wake up to them and think for themselves. But this is why it's so important not to just speak out about the evidence like we do every week on the show, but to speak about it confidently, to be unapologetic about it, and to assert it and not back down and not be bullied into silence. And back in Galileo's time, as Jonathan Cole points out in this video, a lot of the people who sided with Galileo didn't have all the answers either. All right, they didn't know the full dynamics of how the universe works. They couldn't answer every question. They just knew what the official story of how the universe and the solar system operated didn't make sense. The same goes with our current situation with 9/11 Truth, when people put you on the spot and say, well, if it was a controlled demolition, who did it? Cut to the chase, who did it? All right, all you can do is just point to the physics and say, no, the official story doesn't make sense. Now, people have their opinions, very well-educated opinions. A real investigation would get to the bottom of that. But when waking people up, it's very important to stick to what can be proven and what the other side can't weasel out of. And actually, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, I believe, has a new FAQ, frequently asked question, addressing that. Who was responsible for putting the explosives in the towers? And if they don't have it up now, they'll be getting it up soon. I'm not sure if it's been published yet or not. However, that is the approach to take. Is that, we do not know. We have to have a real investigation, and that leaves people wiggle room. It allows people who don't want to go there, who don't want to think about the implications of the controlled demolition evidence, room to still blame it on whoever they want to, but think that there might be more to the crime than at first we knew. Okay? And that's a very important thing. It makes it more inclusive. And that strategy, whether you like it or not, we still have to think strategically in pursuing justice for the victims of 9/11 and making the world know what really happened to those buildings. Now, Jonathan Cole, like I said, you can go to 9/11 Blogger and watch 9/11 The Devil's in the Details. And, of course, the symbolic meaning in that title is associating heresy with looking into scientific evidence. Now, on that same bent, and I may have talked about this before on the show, but there's a movie that I recommend every 9/11 truther rent. And the movie is called Doubt, and it's based on a stage play that was written, of course, before the movie was. But I saw the stage play performed in Syracuse before I saw the movie, and it is a great illustration for what we are facing now. Even though it was written before 9/11, that you can find a lot of parallels with what we're facing. And in the movie story, the main character is a nun, kind of an old shrew, who is up against a priest. The priest is the head priest at the school where they both work, and he's a very popular guy. The kids like him. All of the staff of the Catholic school like him. But her own suspicions, things that she observes, makes her believe that the priest is doing things with the children that are inappropriate, sexual abuse type of things. And she can't prove it definitively, but she has her doubt, and she sticks to her guns. And she pursues it, and she keeps pursuing it even though it's unpopular. And the evidence that she has is pretty scant, unlike in real life with 9/11 Truth, where the evidence is pretty solid. I mean, the physics proves that these buildings were brought down in a controlled demolition. She's working with less than we have. But she still has that instinct. She still has that doubt in her, and so she doesn't let up. She keeps on pushing, and I won't give away the ending of the movie. I recommend you go out and read it. But there's a line from this movie. It's actually an exchange between two characters, two nuns, the one who has her suspicions, has her doubts, and another one who simply just wants to return to simplicity, doesn't like all of this controversy being sparked up. The nun who doesn't want all the controversy says to her, it is unsettling to look at people with suspicion. I feel less close to God. And the main character nun, who's suspicious of the priest, says, when you take a step to address wrongdoing, you are taking a step away from God, but in his service. Now, I'm not getting religious on you here, but I think that is a perfect illustration of why some of the awkwardness is necessary, and why it is important to keep on pushing even when the other side doesn't like it, even when it causes a TV show to halt its normal pace, like as you see on Washington Journal and C-SPAN, because that is all part of finding truth, breaking that monotony of the simple music that the other side tries to create to lull everybody to sleep. Because that's how they keep people in the dark. That's how they keep their minds occupied with idle chit-chat and distractions. All right? And so even though sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's unpleasant to have to make some people mad sometimes by asking simple questions or by bringing up this topic when everyone else would just like to talk about gay marriage or the economy or the budget, it still is necessary, even though it stirs up bad feelings in people sometimes. Because this is the only way that we're going to get to justice. This is the only way that citizens can push back and do the work that our media and our government has failed to do. So look up Jonathan Cole's video on 9/11 Blogger, 9/11 The Devil's in the Details, and also check out that movie Doubt, stars Meryl Streep. Watch it, derive your own meaning from that. Don't just go based off of what I tell you. All right, what we're going to do now is what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all of the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. In the following interview, Tom Spellman and I discuss a number of things. Occasionally the conversation goes into other areas of the 9/11 crime that we don't normally cover. So let me just reiterate that the opinions expressed on this show regarding other parts of 9/11, including complicity, are those of the guests and occasionally myself, and don't necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Tom Spellman graduated in 1971 from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a B.S. in architecture. He's an urban activist focusing on the wars and 9/11, and he serves on the board of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Tom, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I gave you a very brief introduction. Can you give our audience a more broad one? Tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and your background.
I did 100 credits in civil engineering. The Vietnam War came along. I was 1A, so I wrote a paper as a conscientious objector, and basically after about 6 months of appeals on a 3-2 vote, who knows who those people were, 3 people believed me, and so I did alternative service instead of going into the Army. So I've always been basically concerned about the issues of war and the issues of justice. So after that, I had to finish my degree because I only had 100 credits in civil engineering, so went back and School of Architecture opened up in 1969. So did that, but after 2 years of that, decided that I wasn't going to become a designer or an architect, and so took my degree and basically became a housing manager for low-income cooperative housing in Milwaukee for 15 years, and then life moved on from there. So.
Well, that's interesting. You know what? I don't really know much about the whole process of conscientious objector. I guess I wouldn't, since I don't believe we've had the draft in my lifetime. So for our audience that might not know much about that, to try to basically state your opinions and why you don't want to participate in this war, as many people were, you have to write out an argument for it, and then it's got to go before some board, and they have to decide whether or not you really have a stance against the war, basically? I mean, is that how it works?
And I mean, there are the peace churches, so the Quakers, the Mennonites, basically those churches, people were generally seen as, yeah, that's the tradition of those churches, and so their positions were more easily granted. And also, each local board, so it was the board in Beaverham, Wisconsin, Dodge County, that had to make that initial decision. And I suspect I was probably one of only 2 or 3 people they'd ever even seen as a conscious objector. So obviously they needed a 1A, and they weren't going to cater to any of this foolishness at all. So, but yes, you would basically write sort of a philosophical paper using whatever religion or ethical standards that you had in your life, and basically make various arguments for why you couldn't kill other people for any purpose. And that was one of the sub-issues, was basically, well, is it just this war, or is it basically all wars? Because this is 1960, it's, really only 15 years after the end of, 15 years after the end of the Second World War, and everybody sees that as sort of a good war, euphemism to say the least. But and so, how do you sort of deal with that, the contradictions in that, situation that this is a good war, so how could you not be willing to fight in a good war?
Well, that's funny that you even have to make that argument. I guess that's kind of the nature of the draft, is they tell you got to go and you got to go. But to have to make that distinction between, well, I just won't fight in this war, or I won't fight in any war because I don't want to kill people. And I guess it's not something that'll come up now. Who knows in the future what they might reinstitute. I know it probably won't come up for me.
Remember, Andy, everybody signs up for the draft, men and women now, and the provisions are still all there.
That's right. And they always say we don't have the draft. We should bring back the draft and make that debate. It's not an issue for me now because I'm 35 at this point, and I got a bad hip, so I probably wouldn't be very effective out in the field. But I imagine if somehow I got to put my soul into a younger body and be of drafting age, what about the argument simply is that it's not my problem, it's not my war, especially if we get into something with Russia or some new fill-in-the-blank dictator that we want to overthrow in the Middle East because he's made some decision that he wants to sell his resources in some other currency besides dollars. I wonder what they would say to the objections of, I just don't want to do it. It's not my problem. You started this, you finish it. Basically, I'm going to just live my life. I guess that argument would fly with...
There were a lot of people who would argue that way about Vietnam, and it didn't go very far. Because in lots of ways, Vietnam was not much different. It really is the first war. I mean, I'm not sure what a good term to use to describe the war, but a war of a choice as opposed to, the forces of the world around you all basically in some form of chaos, and then basically, you enter it, and in this case here, Vietnam clearly wasn't that at all, and all of the rest of the stuff is not that, and all of it ties into 9/11. 9/11. I mean, the way I see 9/11 is basically they. And Jeremy Scahill actually, I thought, came up with a reasonable definition of the they, and that is basically the lifers inside the CIA, the lifers inside the Pentagon, the lifers inside these various institutions. And even if you look at Cheney, Cheney starts off in the Defense Department, then he goes over under Reagan, and then he goes over under Papa Bush, and then basically he's out for years as a neocon, doing what? Writing the paper called, what's the name of the paper?
The Project for a New American Century?
Project for a New American Century. And then he comes back in as vice president. I mean, when you have players like that who are sustained for 20 and 30 years, and their attitudes, their desires, they become the dominant force, and that's exactly what we've seen. I mean, they all learned from Vietnam that basically you can't have kids free. So what do? We make sure that tuition is high enough so that kids are no longer free. You can't have them out in the streets. You can't risk any of those behaviors. They all need to be able to get a job to pay off the student loans. So that was a pretty simple solution to that problem, and it just goes on from there.
Well, it's funny too, the way things are going now. As soon as you are able to finish off your student loans, it's time to start saving for your retirement. And so, yeah, I can see that where people don't want to rock the boat because of various concerns. A lot of them having to do with money. And you talked about these people in government and some individuals who come up when folks talk about potential complicity. Let's get to 9/11 because you described that your education was in engineering, architecture. You had this background. You decided to go somewhere else with your career. It's funny where life takes you. Believe me, I know, folks. But you have this background, and so the event happens. I want to know kind of what was your initial reaction to the event? Were you awakened on day one like some people say they were? Did it take time? What finally did wake you up and just make you decide to start taking action?
I saw smoke. I didn't have the ability to understand really what was going on. So what I've come to understand is what my psyche saw was smoke, and when the two towers came down, and then that would be okay because that was smoke. And didn't know much about 7. Maybe saw 7 collapse, but then again, nothing. You'd never see 7 again, so there isn't any way to sort of resurrect it. I wasn't in New York City. I'm not a computer geek. But basically by the winter, spring of 2003, I was unemployed, and there was discussion in the press along with on the internet about what was going on at the Pentagon. By that time, there were a number of websites that had been established and a number of theories. And basically, the most viable, in a way, was what happened at the Pentagon, because there was some footage, there was a lot of action, there was a lot of different things going on that you could sort of piece together. And I mean, the Pentagon is a 50-foot high building, 60-foot high building. I mean, surely should be able to figure out what happened at the Pentagon. You have all these witnesses and stuff. And that's still my main criticism, is that no small group of people basically got on top of that and totally defined that situation the way, in essence, architects and engineers has done with the 3 towers in New York City. But by the time I was done with it, you could put a plane in it as far as I was concerned. There wouldn't be a plane in it. You can argue either way on the deal. And that's in 2003. But the one thing I was positive of, or the 2 things, was one of them was that the official story was not true. Primarily based for me at that point in time on NORAD. That NORAD story was not believable. And secondly, that anybody who talked about explosives in the buildings in New York City was basically a CIA agent, because we all know that that's not possible, period. Just on its face, we know that that's not possible. And I'm not sure when, Jones, it must be a year and a half, 2 years. So I'm around on the internet looking at stuff during this period of time, and I don't remember the day or the time that I read Stephen Jones or hear his comment. Random fires and random damage can never produce a symmetrical collapse. And that's when I also see 7 collapsing, and finally begin to see some of the footage of 7. And I'm a scientist, and it's over. You can run around and be in denial, and you can do anything you want. Doesn't make any difference. It is simply that statement that is the absolute proof that only explosives can cause a building to collapse the way all of the video evidence shows it. It's over. And now the question, basically from shortly after that point in time to this day, is where are the physicists? Where are the engineers? How is it possible that after all of this time, they still have remained silent?
Well, they're not so much silent anymore as that petition number grows, thanks to the excellent work of people like you at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, getting the word out, waking up more people. I just talked to a person who has put the movies produced by Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth up on local public access channels in Boston. That's a huge reach, and all this work of volunteers taking place, but at the epicenter are the people at the organization producing the content and out there just educating the public, people like you. And I always love to ask this question about how people woke up and get their initial thoughts after they woke up, because it's one of those things that's just like, wow, this is real. I can't believe that, because I was like you for years. I would hear people talk about explosives in the buildings, not on a constant basis. It would just kind of come up in the whispers in the background. I didn't pay much attention to it. I just kind of dismissed it as a lot of people initially do, or they used to, before people started waking up more and more now, as just a kind of a conspiracy theory. And I wouldn't get offended. I would just simply not think about it beyond the moment that I heard it. And then when you actually wake up to it, it's almost like you got to do something. You don't even know what to do, but you got to do something. Even if you're just posting stuff on the internet through social media, there's something you just feel you need to spread the word and alert the public. So what did you do? I mean, at first, as you wake up to all the different things, and it sounds like it was kind of like a little jigsaw puzzle you put together over years, what was some of the activism that you carried out to try to educate the public about what really happened to the towers and buildings of it?
In a way, I had it sort of easy, because at about that same time, AE comes around, and I make early contact with Richard on some technical points in his presentation and stuff like that. And Richard says, well, come and join the show. So basically, what I did for all my professional life was basically I did books. And so AE needed a functional bookkeeper. We eventually got the 501c3 status that we have today. And so basically you need a good set of accounting and good set of books in order to be able to make the auditors happy and the IRS happy. So that became my avenue of work in terms of inside of AE, and then basically trying to direct the organization on the board and making the critical decisions along the way that we have made to get where we are today, which is frustrating for some people. It's a group of 5, 10, 50 people trying to deal with. I was talking to a man just yesterday who's written, I can't think of the name of the book he just finished writing, but Beyond War is it's an organization that's been around for a few years, but basically 2014 is the 100th anniversary of the start of the First World War. And so in terms of lots of people's sort of consciousness, that's the war that really begins all of the rest of the wars are sort of localized. But that basically, because it was called World War I, was really that first major step. So here we are 100 years later, and how many wars have we had in between these 2 points in time? And so basically finally getting to the point where you basically are going to gather up people who are opposed to war around the world and create a mass organization of names and actions around the world aimed at banning war. That basically, as I said, 9/11 was basically the they going all in, and it all is off of the Project for a New American Century. What did we need? We needed a new Pearl Harbor. And who benefited out of 9/11? The military, the weapons makers. I mean, the concept of making a weapon of mass destruction in the form of a gun that can shoot 100 bullets a minute makes no sense to ever do that. And I guess the consciousness that rises to finally say no, those things are going to be banned. Those, are not going to be acceptable in the world, as opposed to just in the United States. And so it basically, sort of like slavery, there was a point at which there were a whole group of people who had no issue with owning another human being. And that consciousness changed. So basically, we are potentially in another conscious raising, changing moment in our lives, and awareness of 9/11. But as he sat across from me, and I was laying this out to him, and he didn't know about Building 7 or anything, and he just said, "If this is true, this is huge." I said, "Yeah, that's the point. It is huge." So, as opposed to many people on the left who refuse to deal with, that happened, now 13 years ago. Who cares? That's not important anymore. Like, the truth doesn't matter. And you go, just wait a second. Last time I checked, the truth really does make a difference.
Right, and I agree with you. And you were talking about World War I, and now in this point in history, 100 years later, and I thought World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. And
right,
back to your question, how many have we had? And I want to tell the audience, because you're talking about all of these deeper concepts and just war in general, and how we're shifting paradigms, and people are beginning to question not just 9/11, but the implications of 9/11, everything that spawned off from it, like the wars and the new ones they're always trying to create, and they're starting to say, no, I don't want it. And just like I said, that I would have told the draft board, it's not my problem. You started this, you finish it, you go fight it if you want, but your issues are not mine. People are starting to do that now on a massive scale, some at a faster rate than others. I want to tell the audience, there's a site called LibriVox.org, I believe it is, and they have free audiobooks, and they're read by volunteers. It's a great site, not just for the stuff I'm telling you to check out right now on there, but just any book, fiction, poetry, whatever. It's great. I listen to it on my MP3 player while I'm at my day job, and you can download from there Smedley Butler's book, War is a Racket, and you can listen to it an entire morning. It does not take you very long to get through this book. It's just the testimony, manifesto of a general who was very celebrated during his time, telling everybody just how much of a scam war really is, talking about how much companies profit, like over 100% of their profits spike during wars, how the U.S. Army will buy mosquito nets in bulk from a company for the soldiers, even though the soldiers are fighting in a country that doesn't have mosquitoes. Little examples like that, but people need to hear that. And that all relates back to 9/11, of course, because when you realize the truth about 9/11 and what really happened to those buildings and the implications of it, it really drives home that point that war is a racket. So I tell everybody to go to LibriVox.org.
Justification. Just as Pearl Harbor was, Pearl Harbor is the justification to get into the Second World War, and whether FDR knew about it or not, in a way, doesn't really make any difference, because once the event happened, all of these people join in. Even 9/11, there are many people, including the one football star who then is killed by friendly fire. I mean, there are all of these people who move in. Now, they didn't move in the same mass numbers as they moved into the war at the Second World War, but still there were numbers right after 9/11. And that's the psyche of what was attempted and what was successfully carried out. You have to admit that they were pretty successful at it, and the complicity of the mainstream press. you're going to know the name of the DVD that was done by the woman now, probably 7 or 8 years ago at least, where basically she takes the TV feeds, and then she basically puts out a DVD in which you hear about the bombs going off and the bombs going off and the explosions and the bombs. You hear all of the feed that was totally and systematically stripped out in 1 day's time. In 1 day's time, by the second day, by September 12th, all of the references to explosions had been stripped out. Who made that decision? How was that decision made? The decision never to show 11 again, even though Dan Rather said, well, this is the third time today, that this building came down. And yet there was a systematic decision.
Right, and we talk about the complicity of the media and also the government, and I was just thinking today, a very good point about all of this, to kind of summarize why 9/11 truth is so important. And I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment, folks. Let's just pretend that the physics stood down, that the collapse of Building 7, or the destruction of Building 7, rather, makes sense on 9/11, and the government story is hunky-dory, perfect, wonderful, just right, all right? Regardless of that, the secrecy of this government, the demonizing of people for asking very rational questions about this is absolutely unacceptable. Because even if you want to believe the official story and that physics stood down on 9/11, 9/11 would still then represent one of the biggest intelligence failures of our government in history. So they're in a position of where at the very best, again, playing devil's advocate, they screwed up. All right, they owe the American people explanation after explanation for as long as the American people want to ask for one. For the next 100 years, people have a right to information. All right, so when someone makes a request for the data for the Building 7 models from NIST, the people have a right to get that so they can do their own research. They do not deserve to have their request denied for some vague public safety excuse. All right,
so but that's an ideal world that we don't function in, and probably haven't functioned in for a fair amount of time. That concept of democracy, that the people have rights. Basically, if you go back to the civil rights movement and I don't even know that much about the Black Panthers and all of those issues and how the government played in there. But basically, there are three people. There's Gandhi, King, and JFK. And those three people, basically, Gandhi quieted New Delhi in 5 days of fasting. He brought the warring parties who had been killing one another massively. The amount of blood in the streets was unbelievable. But they respected him so much that they all the main people of the various religions all acknowledged that the Muslims had a right to come back into the city, to take their place in the city where they had been driven out of. And within 2 weeks of that point in time, he was killed, because anybody who has that ability has to be eliminated. And you look at King, and basically the same thing goes on there. And JFK, there's enough evidence now in terms of some of the stuff that he was thinking about doing that he needed to be removed as well. Plus, he was young. Gandhi was very old, obviously, but the other two are relatively young. And that really was the significance of JFK, was he was really the first young president. And then basically we went back to the old men again after that. So you've got that aspect as well. So individual rights in any of this equation here are just smoke and mirrors at best. Yeah, it's supposed to be somewhat different, but it unfortunately, is not. And that's part of the sickness. That's a demonstration of the sickness.
Right, and I've said it before on this show, is that when you allow people, who these faceless who some people can make some educated theories on who was behind it. When you let anyone, any establishment, government, media, be involved in bringing down 3 large buildings in New York City on a bright blue Tuesday morning, right in front of everybody, and an obvious controlled demolition once you wake up to the evidence and see it, and then proceed to lie and cover up and obfuscate about it for 13 years, what do you expect is going to happen? What do you think of the state of our rights are going to be in this country? Or you let them get away with one thing, they're going to try to get away with more and more. It's just basic dealing with bullies. 101. You should learn this in elementary school. Okay, you let yourself get pushed around, it's just going to keep on continuing until you fight back, until you push back. And the way to fight back in this instance, of course, is not through violence and shooting and things like that. It's through your words. It's by unapologetically speaking out. And you talked about the complicity of the media. I don't know if you've seen any of the clips of politicians and other media people answering questions on C-SPAN's Washington Journal in the morning. I'm always interested in people's take on that, to the responses that are received in those compilation videos, if you've seen that.
I mean, I've looked at a few of them and stuff like that, and I mean, you are to be commended highly for the work that you do. Basically, you're keeping it in a public sphere. I saw one recently in which the commentator basically says that, oh yes, this is a comment from a group of people who basically, even though it's not the same person, they basically are always asking a question around 9/11, and this is this person, and then he very respectfully let the person go on and ask the question. I thought that was very, but I mean, so it definitely is a consciousness. We went and just met with the board for public radio in Wisconsin. And again, they have open meeting laws. They get state money. So it took, it's only taken me a while to sort of piece it together. And we went and they have 5 minutes of that you can go in and talk and stuff like that. And so I was waiting for some response, and no response, and no response. And I called the contact person once, twice, nothing. So I finally called him a third time. And he said, oh, that's good that you called, that he had been thinking about this. But he basically, he argued that the board didn't control what the people did on the stations in terms of programming, and that he believed the official story. And I mean, you just sit there and just say, how is this possible? And basically it was just this total refusal by this group of people to come to any terms at all. And so we're going to follow up with each of the programs now. My wife knows a few of these people very well, listening to them for any number of years, and meet with their staffs and, see what kind of headway can be made. But it only takes a small crack in the dam, if it's in the right place, for it to break. And you don't know where it is, and you don't know the time. But yet we know that it will eventually occur. There isn't any way around it that it will not occur. That much I know for sure. Whether it's in my lifetime, sort of like the Martin Luther King speech of, on the mountaintop.
I may not get there with you.
Pardon?
Right? Where Martin Luther King says, I may not get there with you, but
yeah.
And I might be butchering it a little, but I've seen the promised land, right?
Right.
Now, it's funny because you talked earlier about being on the board at 9/11 Truth and how you contributed to some paperwork and things like that. And I think that's a testament to illustrate to our listeners, because folks think that, I volunteer, it's going to be me out there leafleting, it's going to be me standing out there with a sandwich board or something out on the street corners. They think that that's what volunteering is, that it's going to just involve a limited number of activities. But the fact is, if you have any talent whatsoever, I'm talking to you, the audience, if you have any talent whatsoever that can be used in this movement. All right, so if you're an artist, I mean, you can make some really cool artwork that illustrates the evidence that AE 9/11 Truth brings to the table. And a lot of it's self-directed, but even if you don't have a major creative talent, if maybe you're a left-brain person and you do bookkeeping, you do accounting work, there's still things that you can do. There's volunteer opportunities for anyone, and you can fit into any kind of situation or project that AE 9/11 Truth will be creating. I mean, people have found their place there who come, and more will. The key is just getting involved and volunteering in any way that you feel comfortable doing and that you think you can have the biggest impact. So I wanted to get that out there.
What I always say is the two most important things, and Andy is clearly a demonstration of that, is that it's going to be self-directed, number one, guaranteed. You got to know what you're doing and understand the importance of doing it and then doing it. And it will only make a difference if you're doing that piece a year from now. Then it makes the difference. But anybody who comes for 3 months or 4 months and then basically goes away, yeah, that was a little bit of help. But the amount of energy and time that went into bringing them to some level of understanding expertise is primarily dissipated if they leave shortly. And so that is the critically important thing. You've been doing this for at least 2.5 years that I know of for sure. And you get better at it, and people begin to respect you because, gee whiz, they're still there. Wow, what's going on there? Those people are still there. And there is that whole aspect that if we fully understood what to do and how to do it, to crack the nut, to crack the dam, we would obviously do it. We tried with the New York Times. I mean, I was intrigued. That billboard that sat across the street from the New York Times for 2 months, not one of them cracked. Not one of them cracked. I mean, where is the morality of those individuals? I mean, they we were already pretty sure that they were relatively bankrupt, but, for 2 months, for not one of them to sort of say, hey, I can't give you my name, but we're with you, or anything at all. I mean, that's the stuff that you just sit there and scratch your head at. And,
well, it's funny, and I don't want to interrupt you, but Austin Farwell did his outreach out there in front of the New York Times building. It's in a video, and he tried to speak to a reporter going in, and the reporter said, well, I'm just, I'm not one of the editors. So it's everybody passes the buck. They keep on expecting that somebody else is going to take care of this. And the real, epiphany most people have to come to grips with is, no, it's really up to you. I mean, when you realize that those buildings were brought down in a controlled demolition and the TV is lying to you, and very obviously lying to you, and I mean, you can see it right on their faces that there's a cover-up going on of this, then that's a really lonely feeling. But it doesn't have to be a lonely feeling if you start speaking out about it. And part of empowering others is being the first to hit the barbed wire and not being afraid of the funny looks or just standing out. And then more people will feel more empowered to stand out too. I've noticed that in my own life in so many instances with things I've done. And another thing I want to point out too, just based off of what we were talking about, with people kind of coming in for a short while and then leaving, I think our culture has been brought up on these movies like Perry Mason, where the crime gets solved in the last 5 minutes because the bad guy just confesses to the whole thing and, in 2 minutes explains it and it's all over. And people expect this kind of outcome. And that's not how the real world works, all right? And I remember my father telling me about boxing strategy, and we talk about this as a big boxing fan, and how he heard about one fighter who, couldn't punch the opponent's head. The opponent would cover up really good, so what he would do is just keep on pounding him on the arms. Now, the arms can take pretty good impact. It's not a knockout shot, but if you keep doing that with somebody, their arms are going to get sore. They're going to get tired. It's going to be harder for them to lift their arms as they're as they try to make their own punches. So their punches against you are going to get weaker, and then slowly those arms are going to fall, and you're going to be able to start making shots at the head. All right. So even though it doesn't seem as it doesn't give you that satisfaction of a big knockout shot, it still has its impact, and over time, it helps you win the fight. So the same thing goes here. Even if you don't think that handing out flyers or making a call to C-SPAN or doing whatever is a big thing, that you're not going to get somebody to confess to it, it still has its impact. It's the equivalent of hitting the arms and watching them slowly come down so you can make the opponent more vulnerable for later on. So it all has a major impact. Now I want to know from you, Tom, since you're on the board, just personally, what do you think your biggest responsibility as a board member for AE 9/11 Truth is?
Well, that's an interesting philosophical question. To make sure that AE stays alive, and obviously money is an integral part of staying alive. There's no such thing as a voluntary website, and Richard has devoted his life to the organization, and the others as well. So that becomes the critical aspect of it, and I don't want to go into the amounts of money and stuff like that. But clearly, raising money is an integral part of making forward movement on this issue. The issue is pretty well defined. I mean, between, first of all, Blueprint for Truth, and then 9/11 explosive evidence experts fatigued out, and now the September 11th. If people haven't seen September 11th, the new Pearl Harbor, and I'll let you pronounce the guy's name who did it, but the Italian movie maker.
Massimo Mazzucco.
Right. That people should watch it. We finally bought it probably 3 months ago, and finally, it's 5.5 hours long. That's a long time. But the other day we finally bit the bullet and watched it, and it's spectacular. I mean, it is systematic. It is thorough. Goes through all of the points. AE deals with their points. So even though we sell it, we don't make comments on the Pentagon and on telephone calls. But basically, he obviously worked very closely with David Ray Griffin and sort of an outline for the movie. And, it's just a matter of getting people to watch it. And even 9/11 people, because there was stuff in there that, you just sort of chuckle when you see it, because it's stuff, again, like, on day one, as I said, I saw smoke. I didn't see 40,000 cubic yards of concrete that was pulverized in less than 15 seconds. Had I seen 40,000 cubic yards of lightweight concrete pulverized in less than 15 seconds, I would have understood on day one. But I didn't. I saw smoke.
And nobody was really expecting that to happen. So you're not really taking notes and observing
right.
it. You're just kind of standing in horror as it happens.
Right. You simply, and I don't fully understand this concept, but basically there was an argument made that as the Indians looked out on the ocean, as the Europeans came on shore, they did not see the boats, because they'd never seen anything floating on the ocean. It wasn't there. They couldn't see the boats because there was no frame in which to understand it.
Right, and it's almost like trying to invent a new color. And when I say that, folks, I don't mean inventing a color that's a combination of previous colors you've seen. I mean just close your eyes and try to think of a new color that's not red, not blue, not yellow, not green, none of those. Has none of those in it. It's just completely something new. I heard a description of that in a book, as a science fiction book, as some guy went through some kind of vortex or something. He saw colors that no man had seen before. And I've always thought about that, and you can't. It's impossible because you've never been introduced to it in your life. You've never seen it, so you have no frame of reference. Same thing goes a lot of times with people in situations like this. The idea that there could have been a controlled demolition, that all these people are lying to them, has never even been introduced into their frame of reference. They've never even pondered it. So when you first introduce this to them, cognitive dissonance sets in, and a lot of them may even immediately reject it. So I just wanted to just throw that in there.
That's like the guy I was talking to yesterday, on Friday, that he did. I mean, what was interesting about him is he was enough of a writer and enough of in a way, he was clearly an academic, he was a writer, but he was open enough because he was constantly dealing with the concept of how do you eliminate war, that he could listen to it. And that is the exception, because if you basically are a north-going Zach and you don't go to the east and you don't go to the west, you're not going to hear much.
Now, I want to know, I always ask this, or ask this very often on the show, and I always like to end these interviews on a positive note if possible. But from you, what gives you hope? Because obviously you're still in it, you keep at it, and so something must be driving you. What gives you hope that we're going to have justice on this issue in the end?
The hope comes that I'll have a safer place for my grandchildren. And after hearing Jeremy Scahill speak, and he's the guy who wrote the book about Blackwater and speaks about the goings-on and has risked his life. I mean, it was really, really intriguing that, I mean, this is a man who's risked his life many, many times. He just had the movie up for an Academy Award, the documentary. Don't know the name of it. And yet, on 9/11, he insists that the official story is true, that he could not go there at all. And it's so intriguing that you just sort of sit there and say, you know, how does that cut through? I mean, you have John Nichols, you have all of these people. He's with the Nation now. You had the Nation early on. You had Counterpunch, and I mean, I always figure that really is the left who basically attacked the 9/11 truth movement. The mainstream media really has ignored us, whereas the left really, made fun of the 9/11 truth movement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it still becomes the fascinating story as to, and you go back to Amy Goodman. You think, oh, gee whiz, here's your person. And Amy watched 7 come down. I mean, that much is clearly established. There's a video of her turning around and running as 7 starts to come down. And yet, never has she commented on, just wait a second. So she knew from day one that 7 came down at 5:20 in the afternoon. And yet has refused to acknowledge any part of what that means. So, that I guess that's not necessarily the most hopeful, but the truth always comes out. There isn't any other way around it. The truth will come out. Don't know how, don't know when, don't know why, but it will come out.
Tom, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you later, Andy.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download the show by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week. Good luck.